Their billion-dollar creation was dying. Their genius had failed. Their science was blind. But the man they called invisible saw what their machines could not. He knew their secret. This isn't a story about saving a plant. It's a story about how the quiet whisper of a forgotten truth became louder than the roar of an entire industry. To the brilliant minds at Biogen Innovations, Samuel was just part of the scenery. A 70-year-old man with hands like weathered leather and a gentle, stooped posture that spoke of a lifetime spent close to the earth. His presence was as natural and as overlooked as the ancient soil itself. He was the head gardener, the silent ghost in a sun-faded work shirt responsible for the lush, manicured grounds that served as a beautiful, green moat around their gleaming glass and steel research facility. They saw an old gardener, a simple man who trimmed hedges and pulled weeds. They never suspected they were looking at Dr. Samuel Washington, a man who had once been a titan in the world of botany, a visionary whose radical theories on photobiology had been laughed out of every major university 3 decades ago. Disgraced and discredited for arguing that plants possessed a form of cellular consciousness and required natural cycles of light and darkness that transcended mere chemical inputs. He had traded his lab coat for gardening gloves. He chose a life of quiet anonymity among the plants that had never doubted him, finding more truth in the rich, dark soil than he ever did in a sterile, brightly lit boardroom. The crisis began in Greenhouse 7, the most secure and technologically advanced facility on the campus, a veritable cathedral of science. Inside, under a carefully controlled artificial sun, grew Project Chimera, the company's billion-dollar gamble. It was a genetically engineered plant designed to produce a revolutionary new biofuel, a plant that was supposed to save the world from its addiction to oil and make its investors obscenely wealthy. But Project Chimera, the perfect creation of a perfect science, was dying. The vibrant, emerald green leaves were turning a sickly, mottled yellow, their edges curling inward as if in pain. The stalks, engineered for incredible resilience, were wilting, bending under their own weight. The very air in the greenhouse, once filled with the clean, oxygen-rich promise of a green revolution, now smelled of decay and the bitter scent of failure. At the heart of the chaos was Dr. Julian Croft, the 28-year-old prodigy who had designed Chimera. With a PhD from MIT and a string of patents to his name, Croft was the undisputed star of Biogen. He was brilliant, arrogant, and utterly baffled. He believed in data, and for the first time in his life, the data was lying to him. "It makes no sense," he raged, throwing a data tablet onto a steel table, the clatter echoing in the tense, humid air. "The genome is flawless. The nutrient solution is perfectly balanced to the microgram. The atmospheric controls are stable to within 1/10 of a degree. There is no pathogen, no fungus, no logical reason for this systemic collapse." His team of young, bright-eyed scientists, recruited from the best universities in the world, could only nod in agreement, their faces reflecting his own mixture of panic and professional frustration. They had run every test, analyzed every variable. The plant was a perfect machine, and yet it was dying. From outside the greenhouse, where he was meticulously pruning a row of rose bushes, Samuel watched. He had been observing the decline of Project Chimera for weeks, a silent witness to the growing panic within. He had listened to the frantic conversations of the scientists as they passed, caught snippets of their failed theories and growing desperation. But unlike them, he wasn't looking at their data screens. He was looking at the plant itself. His eyes, trained by a lifetime of communion with the natural world, saw what their sophisticated sensors could not. He saw the way the leaves curled away from the constant, unrelenting light, not towards it, a gesture of profound exhaustion. He saw the subtle, unnatural rigidity in the wilting stems, a sign of a deep, systemic stress that no nutrient solution could cure. He saw the way the plant's own internal rhythms, the ancient, genetic memory of millennia, were fighting against the sterile, perfect environment they had created for it. They were giving it the wrong light. They were bathing it in a full, unrelenting spectrum of artificial sunlight for 16 hours a day, believing that more was always better. They saw the plant as a biological engine to be fueled, not a living thing to be nurtured. They had engineered its genes, but they had forgotten its soul. Samuel's own discredited research from 30 years ago had proven that plants needed more than just light. They needed the story of light. They needed the gentle, filtered blue light of dawn to awaken their photosynthetic processes, the strong yellow light of midday to fuel their growth, and the soft, red-shifted light of dusk to trigger the hormonal shifts that prepared them for rest. Most importantly, they needed the darkness, the quiet, regenerative period where they could process, heal, and grow stronger. He had tried to tell them. A week ago, he had approached a young, friendly-looking researcher who was taking soil samples near the greenhouse. "Excuse me," Samuel had said, his voice soft and raspy from disuse. "I was just noticing the quality of the light in there. Have you considered a more varied diurnal cycle? A bit of a sunrise and sunset, perhaps?" The researcher had looked at him with a kind but dismissive smile, the smile one gives to a well-meaning but slightly senile grandparent. "That's a nice thought, but this is all scientifically optimized for maximum growth. The spectrum is perfectly calibrated," she had said, patting his arm condescendingly. "Thank you for the suggestion, though. You take wonderful care of the roses." The dismissal, gentle as it was, had closed a door. Samuel had retreated back to his flower beds, knowing a quiet hint would never penetrate their fortress of data. But now, with the project on the brink of total collapse and the scent of decay growing stronger each day, he knew he had to do more. To stay silent would be to watch them murder a beautiful, miraculous plant out of sheer, brilliant ignorance. The polite dismissal from the young researcher was a familiar echo from a past Samuel had tried to bury deep in the soil of his new, quiet life. For 30 years, he had listened as men with impressive degrees but no real connection to the earth called his theories nice thoughts or unscientific poetry. He had learned to retreat, to find solace in the quiet, irrefutable truth of a blooming rose or a sturdy oak. But this was different. Project Chimera wasn't just a plant. It was a potential miracle, a testament to a future he still believed in, and he was watching it die from neglect, smothered by the very science that had created it. He knew he couldn't let it go. A quiet hint had failed. It was time for a more direct form of communication, a language the plan understood, even if the scientists didn't. That night, long after the last of the frantic researchers had gone home, leaving the campus to the hum of its automated systems, Samuel began his work. The Biogen campus was a silent, high-tech fortress under the cold, sterile glow of security lights. He moved through the shadows, not a trespasser, but a man reclaiming his own territory. The sophisticated security system, with its motion sensors and keycard access, was designed to keep corporate spies out. It was never designed to stop the head gardener, a man who knew every blind spot in the camera coverage, every service tunnel, every glitch in the irrigation system's wiring that could be used to bypass a magnetic lock. He had the master keycard for the grounds, a privilege granted to him so he could manage the automated sprinklers at odd hours. No one in the security department had ever considered he might use it to enter the most secure research facility on the property, Greenhouse 7. The air inside the greenhouse was warm, humid, and thick with the cloying smell of decay. The rows of dying chimera plants stood under the harsh, unrelenting glare of the full-spectrum grow lights, their leaves a sickly, washed-out yellow. It was a beautiful, expensive, sterile tomb. From his worn canvas tool bag, Samuel did not pull out any scientific equipment. He pulled out the tools of a gardener, tools that felt more like a part of his own hands than mere objects. There was a small, handcrafted wooden box containing various colored glass filters he had made himself years ago for his own private experiments. There was a thermos of a dark, nutrient-rich liquid he brewed from composted willow bark and rainwater, a simple, ancient remedy for plant stress that was filled with natural salicylates. And there was an old, battery-powered lantern, its glass clean, its wick trimmed. He chose a single plant at the end of a row, one that looked particularly weak, its leaves curled in a silent scream, a patient on the verge of death. First, he gently disconnected it from the automated nutrient drip, the source of the perfectly balanced solution that was doing nothing. With hands that were infinitely gentle, he poured a small amount of his own dark tea around its roots, a quiet offering to the soil, whispering a few soft words in a language the scientists would not have understood. Next, he addressed the light. He couldn't turn off the massive overhead system without triggering a dozen alarms in the main control room. Instead, he worked on a smaller, more intimate scale. He took his old lantern and carefully fitted it with a deep blue glass filter, the color of a pre-dawn sky, a light that spoke of awakening and new beginnings. He positioned it so its soft, gentle light fell directly on the chosen plant, a tiny, isolated island of twilight in the harsh, artificial day. He then rigged a simple, clockwork timer he used for his own small greenhouse at home, setting the blue light to stay on for 2 hours. After that, it would switch off, and he would replace the filter with a soft, red-tinted one, mimicking a sunset, before allowing the plant a full 8 hours of true, deep darkness. He was giving the plant a story, a beginning, a middle, and an end. A cycle, a memory of what it meant to be alive. There now, he whispered to the wilting leaves. Rest. He slipped out of the greenhouse as silently as he had entered, leaving behind his one small, radical experiment. A single point of rebellion in a world of flawed data. The next morning, the chaos in the lab was at a fever pitch. The project's primary investors were flying in from Tokyo in 2 days, demanding a progress report that would determine the fate of the entire company. Julian Croft, who hadn't slept in 48 hours, was a raw nerve of fury and despair. He strode into Greenhouse 7, ready to confront the dying plants as if they had personally betrayed him. He stopped dead just inside the door. In the far corner of the greenhouse, amidst the rows of yellowing, wilting failures, stood one plant that was different. The plant Samuel had chosen. It was still weak, still fragile, but its leaves were no longer a sickly yellow. A faint, but undeniable, flush of vibrant green was returning to them. They were uncurling, reaching tentatively towards the small, dark lantern at its base. It was alive. It was recovering. Julian stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. It was impossible. A single plant, in the same controlled environment as the others, was healing itself. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice a hoarse whisper. His team crowded around him, their expressions mirroring his own shock. He rushed over to the plant, his scientist's mind immediately searching for a variable. He saw the disconnected nutrient tube. He saw the dark, rich-smelling soil around the roots, so different from the sterile substrate of the other plants. And he saw the old, simple lantern with its colored glass filter. "Who did this?" he roared, spinning around. "Who has been in my greenhouse? Who is running an unauthorized experiment?" The young researcher Samuel had spoken to, the one with the kind eyes, stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir," she said, "the gardener. Samuel, he said something to me last week. About the light cycle." Julian's head snapped towards her, his eyes blazing with a mixture of contempt and a dawning, terrifying suspicion. "The gardener?" he repeated, the words dripping with disbelief. "The old man who trims the hedges? You're telling me he came in here and, what? Performed a miracle with a camping lantern and dirt?" He picked up the lantern, examining it as if it were an alien artifact. He saw the simple timer, the handcrafted glass filter. It was the work of an amateur, a peasant. It was an insult to his own multi-million-dollar laboratory. "Get the security footage from last night," he commanded, his voice tight with a rage that was now aimed at a new target. "I want to see the face of the man who thinks he can play God in my lab." They huddled around a tablet, watching the grainy, black and white footage. They saw the familiar, stooped figure of the old gardener slip into the greenhouse. They watched in stunned silence as he tended to the single plant with a reverence and a knowledge that was utterly at odds with his station. They saw him set up the light, a quiet ritual of hope in the face of their brilliant failure. Julian watched, his scientific mind at war with his own colossal pride. The evidence was irrefutable. The gardener's simple, almost primitive, intervention had worked where all of his advanced technology had failed. The man he had never even bothered to learn the name of had just saved his billion-dollar project. The humiliation was a physical blow. He felt a wave of nausea. He, the prodigy, the star of Biogen, had been outsmarted by an old man with some compost tea and a lantern. "Find him," Julian said, his voice now dangerously quiet. "I don't care what he's doing. Get that gardener in here. I need to know who he is. I need to know how he knew." The summons found Samuel where he always was, in the quiet, meditative solitude of the rose garden, carefully deadheading the spent blooms from a particularly vibrant peace rose. A young, nervous security guard approached him, the message from the penthouse delivered with an awkward deference that was entirely new. "Mr. Croft needs to see you, sir," the guard said, the word "sir" sounding foreign and clumsy on his tongue as he looked at the dirt-stained man. "In Greenhouse 7. He said it's urgent." Samuel didn't hurry. He methodically finished pruning the dead roe's head, wiped his shears clean with an oiled cloth, and placed them carefully in his tool bag. He followed the guard, his steady, unhurried pace a stark contrast to the frantic energy that pulsed from the main building. He was a man of the earth, and the earth does not rush. When he stepped into Greenhouse 7, the scene was one of suspended animation. Julian Croft stood before the single recovering plant, his arms crossed, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. The humiliation of a prodigy proven wrong, the desperate hope of a man on the brink of ruin, and the raw, unadulterated curiosity of a true scientist who has just witnessed the impossible. His team of young researchers stood in a wide, silent circle, their eyes fixed on Samuel. They no longer saw a simple gardener. They saw a shaman, a miracle worker who had conjured life from decay with a camping lantern and a thermos of dark tea. "You," Julian said, his voice stripped of its usual commanding tone, now thin and strained. "How did you do this?" He gestured to the plant, its leaves now a vibrant, healthy green, a stark contrast to its dying brethren. "My team, with $100 million of equipment, has been failing for a month. You fixed it overnight with dirt." "I did not fix it," Samuel said, his voice calm and even, the quiet authority in it making the room even more silent. "I listened to it, and then I gave it what it was asking for." He walked past the stunned scientists and knelt beside the plant, his weathered fingers gently touching a new, unfurling leaf. "You have created a beautiful, miraculous thing, Dr. Croft. You have written a masterpiece of genetic poetry, but you have been screaming it at the top of your lungs. This plant needed a whisper." He explained his theory, not with the complex jargon of a scientist, but with the simple, powerful metaphors of a gardener. He spoke of the blue song of dawn that tells a plant it is time to wake its chloroplasts, and the red lullaby of dusk that tells its cells to store energy and rest. He described the soil not as a sterile substrate for chemical delivery, but as a living community, a web of microbial life that supports and nurtures in ways a chemical formula cannot. "You have been force-feeding it a diet of pure, unrelenting data," Samuel said, looking up at Julian, his eyes clear and direct. "You have forgotten that, like any living thing, it needs a story. It needs a rhythm. It needs a memory of the sun it has never seen." Julian listened, his arrogance slowly being chipped away by the simple, profound truth of the old man's words. He, who could map the entire genome of a plant down to a single base pair, had never once considered that it might have a memory. "Who are you?" Julian finally asked, the question that had been burning in his mind since he saw the security footage. "No gardener talks like this." "My name is Samuel Washington," the old man said, rising slowly to his feet, the slight stiffness in his joints a testament to a long life of labor. "And 30 years ago, my title was doctor. I was a professor of photobiology at Crestwood University. I was the man who first proposed the theory of cyclical photoperiodism and its effect on cellular consciousness in plants." A gasp went through the room. The older researchers recognized the name. Dr. Samuel Washington was a cautionary tale from their university days, a brilliant but eccentric mind whose radical theories had been publicly dismantled and ridiculed by the scientific establishment, held up as an example of what happens when one strays too far from accepted dogma. "They said your research was a fraud," the kind-eyed young researcher whispered, her face pale with shock. "They said you falsified your data." "No," Samuel said, a flicker of ancient pain in his eyes. "I simply discovered a truth they were not yet ready to hear, a truth that did not fit their mechanical view of the world. It is easier to call a man a fraud than to admit your own understanding is incomplete." He looked directly at Julian, a new, hard edge to his voice. "Your own mentor, Dr. Alastair Finch, was the one who led the charge against me. He built his career on the ashes of mine." The final piece clicked into place. Julian felt a wave of nausea. His entire education, his entire worldview, had been shaped by the very man who had destroyed the quiet genius standing before him. He was the inheritor of a legacy of lies. "The investors," Julian said, the words a desperate plea, snapping him back to the present crisis. "They arrive tomorrow morning. They are expecting to see a thriving project, not this." He gestured to the rows of dying plants. "You saved one, but can you save them all?" It was the ultimate question, a desperate gamble. He was no longer the arrogant prodigy. He was a drowning man, and the humble gardener was his only lifeline. Samuel looked at the rows of dying plants, then at the young, broken man before him. He saw not an enemy, but a student who had been taught the wrong lesson. "I can try," Samuel said, "but I will do it my way. No computers, no data streams. Just me, the plants, and the light. You will clear this greenhouse of all personnel. You will give me the night, and you will trust me." Julian hesitated for only a moment. His pride, his career, his entire future were on the line. He looked at the single, thriving plant, a beacon of impossible hope in a sea of failure. He had no other choice. "Do it," he said, the words a complete surrender. "The greenhouse is yours." As the team of scientists filed out, their faces a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, grudging respect, Samuel was left alone. He walked through the rows of dying chimera plants, his hands gently touching their wilting leaves, whispering to them, listening to their silent screams. He was no longer just a gardener. He was a physician, and his hospital was full of dying patients. The long, dark night of healing was about to begin. The moment the greenhouse door sealed behind the last of the scientists, a profound quiet settled over the space. It was a silence Samuel hadn't felt in 30 years, the silence of a laboratory that was entirely his own, a kingdom of glass and steel where his theories were no longer a subject of ridicule, but the only law. He stood for a long moment amidst the rows of dying plants, the harsh, white glare of the full-spectrum lights casting long, sterile shadows. The air was thick with the scent of their decay, a smell of wasted potential that broke his heart. He didn't begin with any grand gesture. He started by walking. He moved slowly down each row, his gnarled fingers gently touching a yellowed leaf here, a wilting stalk there. He wasn't just inspecting them. He was communing with them, listening to their silent, individual screams. To Julian Croft's team, they were a uniform crop of failures. To Samuel, they were a hospital ward filled with unique patients, each with its own specific degree of suffering. His work began at the roots. He disconnected every single plant from the automated nutrient drip, the source of the perfectly balanced solution that was, in its unyielding perfection, a form of poison. He then took out his large thermos of dark, fragrant compost tea. It was a simple, ancient brew, a recipe passed down from his grandfather, who had been a sharecropper in Georgia. It was rich with mycorrhizal fungi, beneficial bacteria, and the complex organic compounds that sterile lab nutrients could never replicate. It was not just food, it was life. He gave each plant a small, careful drink, a quiet apology for the sterile diet they had been forced to endure. Next, he addressed the light. This was the heart of the problem, the core of his disgraced and forgotten theories. He couldn't shut down the main system, but he could orchestrate a symphony. From his canvas bag, he pulled out dozens of small, battery-powered lanterns and his collection of handcrafted glass filters. He moved through the greenhouse like a painter, placing a lantern at the base of each plant. He fitted each one with a deep blue filter, the color of a nascent dawn. He set their timers to run for 2 hours, bathing the entire greenhouse in a soft, gentle, awakening light. While the sunrise took effect, he turned his attention to the air. The climate control system was a marvel of engineering, maintaining a constant temperature and humidity. But it was also sterile, lifeless. Samuel opened a small, manual vent near the floor, a relic from the greenhouse's original construction that the modern engineers had deemed obsolete. A breath of cool, damp night air, rich with the scent of real soil and living things, flowed into the tomb. He was reintroducing the memory of the wild. While Samuel worked his quiet magic, Julian Croft was enduring the longest night of his life. He sat in his stark white office, the rows of his awards and patents on the wall seeming to mock him. He had dismissed Samuel's rescuer as a student, but he knew, with a certainty that was eating him alive, that he was the one who had been schooled. He pulled up the university archives on his computer, his fingers typing a name he had only ever heard spoken with derision: Dr. Samuel Washington. The digital records were sparse, almost scrubbed clean, but the outlines of the story were there. A brilliant, meteoric rise. A series of groundbreaking papers on photobiology. And then, the catastrophic fall. He found the records from the 1990 Crestwood University Academic Review. The charges were falsification of data and unscientific, anthropomorphic claims. The chief accuser, the man whose testimony had been the final nail in Samuel's coffin, was Dr. Alastair Finch, Julian's own celebrated mentor. Julian felt a wave of revulsion. He had built his career in the shadow of a man who had not just disagreed with a rival, but had professionally executed him to protect the reigning dogma. He read through the abstracts of Samuel's old papers, the theories about cyclical light and cellular memory. It was all there. A perfect, detailed blueprint for the very solution Samuel was now implementing in his greenhouse. It wasn't a miracle. It was a forgotten science. Just before dawn, unable to bear the suspense any longer, Julian walked to Greenhouse 7. He keyed in his code, the door hissing open. The scene inside stopped him in his tracks. The harsh white lights were off. The entire greenhouse was bathed in a soft, warm, red-orange glow, the color of a perfect sunset. Samuel had replaced all the blue filters with red ones. And in the center of the room, the old gardener himself was asleep in a simple metal chair, his head leaned back, his face peaceful, exhausted. But it was the plants that stole Julian's breath. It was impossible, but it was true. The sickly yellow was gone, replaced by a deep, vibrant, healthy green. The wilting stalks were now reaching upwards, towards the gentle, life-giving light of the lanterns. The air no longer smelled of decay. It smelled of damp earth, of life, of hope. They were not just surviving. They were thriving. In the span of a single night, the old man had done what his entire team of brilliant scientists couldn't do in a month. He had healed them. Julian stood there for a long time, watching the quiet, sleeping gardener and his resurrected plants. The arrogance that had defined his entire life had been burned away, leaving behind a raw, humbling sense of awe. He had been so focused on the genius of his own creation that he had forgotten the genius of creation itself. He quietly backed out of the greenhouse, closing the door without a sound. He would let the old man rest. At that moment, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his assistant. The Tokyo investors have landed. They are on their way to the campus. ETA 30 minutes. The deadline had arrived. Julian looked from his phone to the greenhouse door. His career, the future of the company, the faith of the investors, it all rested on the shoulders of the quiet, sleeping man who had once been a doctor and who had just reminded a brilliant young scientist that the greatest knowledge is not found in data, but in the deep, silent wisdom of the earth. The 30 minutes after Julian received the text message were the most agonizing of his professional life. The Tokyo investors, led by the notoriously sharp and unforgiving Mr. Kenji Tanaka, were navigating the pristine Biogen campus in a silent electric transport, heading for a demonstration that Julian knew was a lie. The official narrative, the one backed by months of flawless data, was that Project Chimera was a resounding success on the verge of full-scale production. The reality was a greenhouse full of plants that had been, until a few hours ago, rotting from the inside out, saved not by their billion-dollar technology, but by the quiet, unsanctioned intervention of a disgraced gardener. Julian stood outside Greenhouse 7, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He had to make a choice. He could follow the script. He could lead the investors into the greenhouse, present the now thriving plants as the result of his own team's last-minute breakthrough, and take the credit. It would be a lie, a colossal, career-defining lie, but it would be the safe choice. It would save the project, the company, and his own reputation. The old gardener, Samuel, would be a ghost again, a quiet, anonymous footnote easily erased. No one would ever have to know. Or, he could tell the truth. He thought of Samuel, asleep in the chair inside, a quiet, dignified figure who had asked for nothing and given everything. He thought of the revulsion he'd felt reading about how his own mentor, Dr. Finch, had built a career on the ruins of this good man's life. To lie now, to take credit for Samuel's work, would not just be theft. It would be a continuation of that same ugly legacy. He would become another Alastair Finch, another man who valued his reputation over the truth. His assistant, a young woman with a perpetually worried expression, rushed up to him, a tablet in her hand. "Sir, Mr. Tanaka's transport is turning onto the main drive. They'll be at the reception hall in 5 minutes. The board is waiting for you." Julian looked at her, then at the greenhouse door. The scent of living, breathing plants, a scent he hadn't even noticed until this morning, wafted out. "Cancel the reception," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "Tell the board and Mr. Tanaka to meet me here, at Greenhouse 7, and tell them to prepare for a change in the agenda." The assistant stared at him, bewildered, but the new, quiet authority in his voice made her nod and hurry away. Julian pushed open the greenhouse door. Samuel was awake now, standing by the open vent, breathing in the cool morning air. He turned as Julian entered, his expression calm and knowing, as if he had been expecting him. "The investors are here," Julian said, the words feeling heavy and inadequate. "They are expecting a presentation from the boy genius who solved the puzzle." He looked at the rows of vibrant, healthy plants. But the boy genius was a fool. He was blind. "The only genius in this room is you." Samuel simply nodded, accepting the confession without triumph. "The plants are recovering," he said, his voice a soft rumble. "But they are still fragile. They will need care. They will need the right kind of light. I need you to tell them that," Julian said, his voice raw with a humility he had never known. "I need you to come with me and tell them the truth. All of it." A flicker of the old, weary caution crossed Samuel's face. "Dr. Croft," he began, "my truth was not welcome in that world 30 years ago. I doubt much has changed." "I've changed," Julian said, "and that has to be enough to start. Please, Dr. Washington, help me tell the right story this time." When the investors and the board of directors arrived at Greenhouse 7, they were met with a scene that defied their expectations. Instead of a polished presentation in a sterile boardroom, they found Julian Croft, the star scientist, standing beside an old black man in a sun-faded work shirt and dirt-stained trousers. Mr. Tanaka, a man whose impassive face had been known to make markets tremble, raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Dr. Croft," he said, his voice a silken blade, "this is an unusual venue for a progress report. We were expecting to see data, not dirt." Julian took a deep breath. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice clear and steady, "you came here today to see the future of biofuel, and you will. But first, you need to meet the man who saved it." He turned and gestured to Samuel. "This is Dr. Samuel Washington, and the data you have been seeing for the past month has been wrong. The truth is, Project Chimera was a catastrophic failure. It was dying, and it was my fault." A shocked murmur went through the assembled executives. Julian continued, laying bare the entire story. He spoke of the wilting plants, the flawed data, and his own team's complete inability to solve the problem. He then told them about the gardener who had seen the truth, about the secret, overnight intervention, and about the forgotten science that had brought the plants back to life. "We believed we could engineer life without understanding it," Julian said, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces. "We gave the plant everything our computers told us it needed, but we forgot to give it what its own ancient memory required: a sunrise, a sunset, and a period of rest. We were trying to run an engine at full throttle, 24/7, and we were burning it out." Dr. Washington, he looked at Samuel with profound respect, reminded us that it is not an engine. It is a living thing. He then told them the story of Dr. Samuel Washington, of his revolutionary theories, and of how he had been professionally destroyed by the very scientific establishment that should have celebrated him. "The greatest innovation at Biogen," Julian concluded, his voice ringing with conviction, "is not this plant. It is the rediscovery of a wisdom we threw away 30 years ago. The future of this company is not just in its technology. It is in the integration of that technology with the profound, simple truths of the natural world, as championed by the man standing beside me." The silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Tanaka walked slowly down the row of thriving plants, his fingers gently touching a vibrant green leaf. He looked at the simple lanterns, the rich, dark soil. He then turned and faced Samuel. "Dr. Washington," he said, bowing his head in a gesture of deep, traditional respect. My own grandfather was a rice farmer. He would have understood your methods perfectly. He, too, believed that you must listen to the land before you command it. He straightened up, his gaze shifting to the pale, sweating faces of the Biogen board members. It seems to me, he said, his voice once again a silken blade, that you have not just been neglecting your plants. You have been neglecting your greatest asset. My consortium's investment was contingent on the success of this project. It is clear that the project's success is contingent on this man. We will be renegotiating our terms. The aftermath was a quiet, swift revolution. Dr. Alastair Finch was publicly disgraced, his legacy forever tainted by the revelation of his 30-year-old crime. He was forced to issue a public apology to Samuel and resign from his university post. At Biogen, the board, under immense pressure from their Tokyo investors, acted decisively. Julian Croft, despite his public confession, was not fired. Instead, he was tasked with creating and co-chairing a new division, the Washington Center for Integrative Botany, a department dedicated to fusing cutting-edge genetic engineering with the principles of natural, cyclical growth. His co-chair, of course, was Dr. Samuel Washington. Samuel did not want his old life back. He refused a corner office, a fancy title, and a massive salary. His terms were simple. He would have a small, dedicated team. He would have final say on the environmental protocols for all new projects. And a significant portion of the profits from Project Chimera would be used to fund a new foundation dedicated to supporting young, unconventional scientists whose ideas had been dismissed by the rigid, dogmatic establishment. He still kept his hands in the soil. His primary office was not in the main building, but in a newly constructed, state-of-the-art research greenhouse. He still wore his simple work shirts, though they were now of a higher quality. He worked alongside Julian, not as a subordinate or a savior, but as a mentor and a partner. They were an unlikely pair, the humbled boy genius and the resurrected master, and together, they changed the face of botany. Project Chimera, under their joint guidance, became a global success, producing a clean, efficient biofuel that exceeded all expectations. But its true legacy was the paradigm shift it created. The story of the old gardener who listened to the plants became a legend in the scientific community, a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance and a testament to the enduring power of forgotten wisdom. One evening, a year after the investor's visit, Samuel and Julian stood together in Greenhouse 7, watching a new generation of chimera plants thrive under a gentle, computer-controlled light that perfectly mimicked the rising and setting of the sun. "It's beautiful," Julian said quietly. "We never could have done it without you." Samuel looked at the young man who had been brave enough to choose truth over pride. "No, doctor," he said, a quiet, satisfied smile on his face. "You just needed to learn how to see in a different kind of light. How many of our greatest breakthroughs are lost, not because the science is wrong, but because we have forgotten how to listen to the silent, ancient wisdom of the world around us. If this story inspired you to look for the hidden genius in unexpected places, please like, subscribe, and share. You never know whose quiet truth might be waiting to change the world."